This is Reverend Dr. Wayne and Withers from Conversation Unplugged. We are, how you say, we are expanding our radio show to a podcast, and now we're in a virtual space. And we received a tremendous amount of response from our interviews on WWDB 860 AM that we're going to continue the conversation in regards to how we're going to unplug to educate, inform, and inspire. Hey, Pastor Brock Johnson, man, how you doing today, man?
I'm great. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. No complaints and things of that nature. It's normally it's a little bit unusual right now because we're normally broadcasting from a different space and a different place on an AM radio station, but we're expanding our reach and everything. So definitely, this is a great opportunity to really, how can you say, expand the brand of Conversation Unplugged. Any inspirational thoughts before we get into the subject matter today?
Just the fact that I'm excited about where we're going. I'm excited about the lives that we'll touch and the topics that we'll discuss and the way we're going to help folk move to a different place, both spiritually and personally.
Yeah, man, definitely. And so, wow, I'm just looking at our Facebook page, right? And I just want to make sure that we are capturing our storyline today. And if not, we're just going to keep on moving and be able to do what we do. You got me, in the spaces and places in which we're doing it. And so we're going to continue to move forward. Listen, man, there's been a lot that's been going on in the media, and there was a story that caught my eye that definitely you and I, we spoke about it and everything. As a disclaimer, there are some aspects of the story that I'm not going to touch. You got me. And you and I, we talked about it, some aspects of it that I'm definitely not going to touch, for various reasons. Not just going to be candid with you because there are those that unfortunately broadcast in the media who should not have been broadcast. You got me? And, I take that, and I'm not going to mention the name or anything like that. One person I know personally, the other person I know professionally. You got me? And so, I'm not going to add insult to injury. I will say, and I'm going to unplug that just a little bit further in another setting, that the whole concept of when someone candidates for a church is supposed to be private. And the reason why, the name should not have been broadcast or anything like that, put in the newspaper, because one, it wasn't called. And then you don't know how it's going to have an impact on that particular congregation. And so at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, I'm pro pastor. I'm always going to be pro pastor. And so I didn't think that was cool. I didn't think that was right. And so because of that, I'm not going to mention anybody's name or anything like that to protect the privacy of those who indirectly is involved, because of the nature of the situation. And so I sound like I'm like incoherent and everything. I'm like juggling a couple of things at the same time and want to make sure that, I get this particular story in the place where it should be. When I'm talking about where it should be and everything, I'm talking about making sure that this video gets broadcast on my personal page so we can move forward. All that being said, there's a story. Let's get to the heart of it as I'm trying to juggle a few things at this particular time. There's a story that's been published. And that story deals with a person not person in all. I don't know why I'm stuttering today, man. Maybe because I worked out a little bit hard today. So, Abyssinian Baptist Church, very prominent church in New York. I believe that's Harlem, New York, where former pastor was Calvin Butts. And Calvin Butts transitioned from labor to reward. In the process of him, transitioning from labor to reward, they are now without a pastor. And so with them being out of pastor and everything, now they are in a position to call a pastor. You got me? And so there are candidates that are lined up in order for them to call a pastor. And this one particular person, her name is Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman. Now, I've heard her preach in 2010 at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. It was on a civil rights trip where, we went from Philadelphia to Memphis to Birmingham, from Birmingham to Alabama, from Birmingham to Atlanta. And so, I'm quite familiar with her preaching, and I've been looking at her journey from, her academic, journey and everything, especially, I know at one time she had to stop at Duke University Divinity School, where I am an alum of Duke University Divinity School and things of that nature. So all that being said, she is a candidate, or was a candidate, for Abyssinian Baptist Church. When they narrowed it down to the finalists, she wasn't one of the finalists. And when she wasn't one of the finalists, then a lawsuit emerged. And the lawsuit that emerges basically says, and it's been reported in CNN, the AP News, etc., historic Black Baptist church sued by a woman who says that she wasn't hired as senior pastor due to gender discrimination. CNN reports a woman interviewed for the position of senior pastor at Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City is suing the church and a former chair of the search committee for gender discrimination, court documents show. It says Ebony Marshall Turman, but I'm going to give the proper respect where it's due. Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, an associate professor of theology and African American religion at Yale Divinity School and former assistant minister at Abyssinian, says the decision not to hire her for the senior pastor position was motivated by gender discrimination, according to the complaint filed in the United States District Court in Southern District of New York on November 29, 2023. First of all, Pastor Johnson, before we go any further, share with me your thoughts about what you were shocked and surprised when we talked about this story after the radio show yesterday. Just share with me your thoughts about this whole entire article that I just read, and your thoughts about this lawsuit that's taking place.
Well, I think the first thing that we have to understand is that in 2024, we're still dealing with 1950s church stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked because of the progressive nature of our society. The church is not caught up with the progressive nature of our society. Abyssinian Baptist Church is a long-standing church in the African American community. And what really, as I talked with a colleague of mine about this, and Abyssinian had a big part to play in the civil rights movement.
Yes, they did.
But when it comes to hiring practices around the pastor, they don't understand that what you stood for on the one end is what you need to stand with now. And so the lawsuit happening is kind of perplexing to me, because on the one hand, she has every right to sue. But on the other hand, I wonder if it's now the time for our sisters to start kicking doors in of churches and search committees and saying, we want equal access to the process. That gender should not play a role, but what should play a role is qualifications.
No.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, great.
And so,
your thoughts.
And so I liken it to this. And for those of our listeners who are listening, the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule in football says you have to interview an African American. Just because you interview an African American doesn't mean you're going to hire an African American. It just means that you check the box. And I come from a different faith perspective. I come from United Methodist Church, where we do ordain and assign and appoint, if you will, women pastors. When you're dealing with a call system, you're dealing with something different. and so I need to make that difference right there. But I think that we need to do more in our churches and check boxes, but we need to put the most qualified person, regardless of sex. If they qualify, if they check the boxes, if they meet the church's needs, they should get the position.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that, as you shared your thought process and everything, I wanted to take the first part of this interview or this subject that we're discussing, right, and look at it from, her perspective. And then I also want to share with you, as a former moderator of a Baptist association, and not only a former moderator of a Baptist association, but for approximately 12 years, even as moderator. So 8 years of this experience that I'm sharing was from the perspective of a vice moderator. And then the last 4 years of those, of those experiences come as moderator of a Baptist association. So I've also participated in catechism classes, as well as helping churches set up pulpit search committees within the Baptist church. Well, not Baptist church, but within Baptist denominations. And so, there's some insight that I'm able to share in that regards. And so I wanted to, share the following. Now, I will say on behalf of Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman, I didn't hear this at Abyssinian. I have no connection at Abyssinian. But there are times that when I served in the capacity of either vice moderator or vice moderator at large or moderator, and we go in and we're asked to help, churches set up pulpit search committees as they begin the search process for calling a pastor. One of the questions that we've asked is, okay, as you're looking for candidates to be, candidates that you want to consider to be pastor, one of the questions I ask is, okay, what's your position on women being pastors and women in ministry? And so that's a question that I ask. My position is I support women in ministry. I support women pastors. So a woman being a pastor, a woman in ministry, it's not an issue with me. Yeah, I am a pastor, but God forbid, if I'm ever in a position where I have to stop pastoring, I don't have a problem sitting under, I would call, the shepherdship. Maybe that's not the right word, but I don't have a problem sitting under a female pastor, being undergirded by a female pastor, because my take on that is, God's servant is God's servant. So whether it's male or whether it's female, much respect to female pastors that I heard in preacher, female pastors I have a brother-sister relationship with. Much respect to Bishop Vasti McKenzie. Don't know her personally, but when she came and lectured as a guest lecturer at the, Gardner C. Taylor lecture series, my last semester of my last year at Duke University Divinity School, I never forget, she said, this is before she became bishop, she said, every time she go in the pulpit, her motive is to burn, because she said that she wants to be on fire, because that person who comes in the pew, that may be the first and the last time that you ever preach to them. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, every time I go into the pulpit, I'm gonna preach like it's my last sermon, because I don't know if I'll ever come in contact with that individual again. So this was 1999. Been preaching now for a long time. Now it's 2024. I wasn't a pastor in 1999. Well, I started pastoring October 1999 to be exact. At the time I came in contact, no, that was 98. I'm sorry, that was October 98. So from October 98 up until now, inspired by Bishop Vasti McKenzie, I make sure that I go into the pulpit and I burn. You got me? There are preaching giants like Gina Stewart out of Memphis, Tennessee. You know what I mean? Very, very sound preaching. There's others. There are female pastors or elders that I'm close to. Reverend Dr. She's a minister in ministry. Let me restate that. Reverend Dr. Marsha Brown Woodard. That's my sister in Christ, who's getting ready to become the president of the Baptist Pastors Ministers Conference. There is my sister in Christ, who's co-pastor of First Chronicles Community Church in Durham, North Carolina, Reverend Pebble Lindsay Lucas. My sister in Christ, who was my parents' pastor, Elder Janet Sturdivant. who was former pastor of Asbury AME. That's my sister in Christ, very sound preacher. Sister Valerie, Pastor Valerie Andrews, great woman of God. You got me? These are women that I've established relationship with. I can't forget, we've been close. She's your sorority sister. Her name is Reverend Carla Brown, to be exact. She's at Arch Street Presbyterian Church. She's an AKA when we were teaching at Cut/Lancaster Bible College. She was always get on me because my wife is her sorority sister. Are you taking care of my sister? Very sound individual when it comes to sound theologically, sound when it comes to preaching, etc. And so when I, think about women in ministry, I think about them, but I have heard, when we go in and set up pulpit search committees and everything, first question, are you going to consider a woman as pastor? Some will, and then I've heard some say absolutely not. I've heard it. You got me. I'm not saying this in Abyssinian's case because I'm gonna give the flip side on in the next 15 minutes from the church perspective side. So I'm not here to say Abyssinian is wrong. I'm here to give a perspective of various lens. So I'm looking at it through Reverend Dr. Ebony Marsha Terman's position, and then I want to look at it through the lens of Abyssinian Baptist Church. Yeah, and all of this is theory and not fact. But I have to also say that when we set up pulpit search committees, that's not the only question that's asked. There's a whole array of questions. And so I've heard, I don't want a woman as pastor. I've heard folks say, I don't want anybody over 55. I heard some folks say, I don't want a person who's divorced. Some say, I don't want somebody younger than boom, boom, boom. You got me. I don't want somebody who's single to be pastor. So there's a whole bunch of idiosyncrasies that go into setting up a pulpit search committee and also setting the stage for them to determine, who they're going to call to be their pastor. You got me? And so when I heard her say in this narrative that from the research that was done, that, someone said, there won't be a female pastor over my dead body. I can say this in a pastoral setting when I was entertaining the idea, and this was early stage of pastoral setting, of ordaining women to become deacons. I heard an older deacon say, over my dead body. I've heard that statement. But the statement doesn't represent the whole entire church, because what people have to understand is in the Baptist church, let me make this clear, in the Baptist church, unlike United Methodist and AME, we are autonomous. And I don't like to say final say, because from a Baptist perspective, there are some in the Baptist denomination, parishioners and leaders has tried to take this and try to flex their muscles to try to stop God's vision and ministry from going forth. But everything is affirmed by the congregation. So you can have candidate A, candidate B, but it's affirmed by the congregation. So if there's a candidate that didn't make it to the final process and the congregation says, no, we would like that person to go through why hasn't this person made it through the final process? That question can be raised at the floor of the congregation, because again, we don't have a bishop that has authority over us to appoint or remove someone out of a congregation. That person, the congregation can affirm whether they green light this candidate or not green light this candidate. You got me? And so I've read what has been reported in the news, because I don't know all the intricacies and everything. But then, Pastor Johnson, there's some things that I see in here in this article that disturbs me. You know what I mean? It disturbs me. And what I'm getting ready to say, it doesn't take from Reverend, Ebony Marshall Terman. It doesn't take, I'm not taking away from that, but there's a lot of things that disturb me. And if I can make the shift and go from, the congregation's perspective and everything, here's problem number one. Somehow along the line, there's been some information, the way it's coming across in this article. This is theory for me and not fact. So it's theory and not fact. There's a possibility that there was some communication from the pulpit search committee to the candidate, and that shouldn't happen. But it does happen. But it shouldn't happen. Should not happen. And I'm not saying this is a case. I'm just reading from these articles. So there's the spoken and the unspoken. When there's one part of the article that says, I don't know if it was said to her directly, not over my dead body or etc. But, you know, when the person didn't make the, well, let me backtrack. It says here, gender discrimination motivated by the decision not to hire, a fact discussed openly during meetings of the committee. So this is where my antenna comes up. So when I'm looking at this article, because this is on various news sources, actually, this was written by Rashad Grove. Rashad Grove is a pastor in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Wayne, Pennsylvania to be exact. First Baptist Wayne. He wrote this article for BET. He's in the Philadelphia area. So when he wrote gender discrimination motivated by the decision not to hire, a fact discussed openly during meetings of the committee, let me stop right there. So whatever is discussed by the pulpit search committee stays in the pulpit search committee. So how does a candidate, you got me? How does a candidate who is candidating to become pastor of a church get this information?
Someone on the pulpit committee, someone on the search committee did not agree with whatever was said in the committee, and probably figured out that, and I don't know, that she probably was one of the top candidates that needed to be considered. But because of the makeup of the committee and the way that they thought about the process and not having a woman, she was not considered because of her gender, not because she wasn't qualified, but because that's the way that the stronger members of the committee went. And they went back and said something to her and said, listen, you were the most qualified, but you didn't get it because you're a woman. And they did that, and they did that by they just said, I need to be anonymous, or it could have been somebody who wanted to flaunt it in her face that you're not going to get it because you're a woman.
You know, it also could be, in all fairness, it wasn't even a whole committee. It only takes one or two. You know, it's in situations like that. You know, I remember, so, man, one of the churches I was called to, no, first church I was called to, let me be specific. And I almost pulled out. You got me? I almost pulled out from the whole calling process because there was a disturbance over my name being brought forward to be called. And the disturbance was that related to the fact that not me doing anything immoral or anything of that nature, that there was a certain group that wanted me. And so when a certain group wanted me, they were like one of the dominant factors in the church. And so those who wasn't part of the group that wanted me felt that if that group got me as their pastor, that basically that they would have power. And so they decided that they wanted to get another candidate, right? That would be favorable to them, that would usurp the power that they felt this particular group was trying to have or trying to obtain. So now you got to divide in the church, and all of these mechanisms are being put up to stop my calling from becoming pastor of this particular church. Now, let me set the stage of why I'm sharing this story. Now I'm getting telephone calls at the house. Yeah. Now I'm getting calls at the house from folks from the pulpit search committee. This was the time when caller ID was just coming. Now I'm showing my age. This was the time when caller ID was just came out and got popular and everything. And I started getting, so there was two type of calls I was getting. I was getting calls from either someone from the search committee or someone that was connected to someone from the church search committee trying to discourage me from staying in the process intentionally. You got me? You don't want to do this, you know, these folks are fighting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other end, you had someone that was calling, giving me updates that I never asked for and sharing with me the disturbance that's going on and the conflict, et cetera. All of this is happening. I didn't ask for the information. I didn't seek it, but yet I'm getting it. Which should not have happened. Exactly. Got me? It should not have happened. And so when I look at the statement here, and sorry if I'm not looking at the camera, when I look at the statement here again, and it says that someone said on the committee, the only way a woman would be hired over my dead body, I start to raise the question, okay, who from the search committee shared that information? Because one, that's an information that the candidate should not have been informed, because that's one person's opinion. What I didn't hear is how many people made up the pulpit search committee.
Right.
And even if you are the chair, that's one person's opinion. You got me? And if that's only one person's opinion, that doesn't determine everybody's opinion. So I know I've been talking for a while. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question? So the candidates come in and they preach and they lead a Bible study. If that's if right, each candidate gets the opportunity to stand before the congregation.
Every process is different. Okay. It depends on what the church sets up. So I've had a situation where in one setting where one setting in the first church I pastored, I came in as a guest preacher. They heard me preach, then they wanted my resume. And then after that, then they wanted an interview. And then after the interview, then they wanted me to come in 1 or 2 times to preach. And then afterwards, it would go before the body, and then it would be determined. In another situation, the second church I got called to, the first interview was a telephone interview. The second interview was a face-to-face. Then they came and visited me at the church that I was pastoring at the time in North Carolina. Then they put a pause on it. And then when they finally narrowed it down, they went on they stopped the process to pray and fast to get direction at how God would have them to go. You got me? So they prayed and they fast. And then they narrowed it down to, the final candidates. They brought me back in for a second interview. And then afterwards, I came and preached. And after I came and preached, about 72 hours afterwards, they brought my name up for a vote to be affirmed. So I share with you just the diversity of how Baptist pulpit search committees operate. And every Baptist pulpit search committee doesn't operate in the same manner.
Okay, because the reason why I asked that question is that if the process is transparent, and if I understand that the congregation has the final vote, but it sounds to me that the search committee decides who they're going to put up in front of the congregation for a final vote. So
what happens here is that the congregation basically is involved with the selection of the search committee and the ground rules of how the search committee operates. Now, one piece that's missing, I'm glad you brought that up. Whenever there's an absence of a pastor, that's where the chair of the deacon board comes into play. Because the chair of the deacon board, in the absence of the interim pastor, guides the congregation through the selection process until a pastor is called. And so what's interesting here is there isn't any mention of a chair of a deacon board. Not saying that they don't have one, but for the prestigious nature of that church, I'm assuming that they definitely have a chair of the deacon board. So it's not that the pulpit selection committee, runs loosey-goosey or anything like that. The congregation entrusts the pulpit search committee that, okay, you're going to put out the request for resumes, you're going to evaluate, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to put a process in place to determine how you're going to go from this amount of resumes down to this amount of resumes. You got me? Or how you go from this amount of candidates to the final candidates. So there's a process in place. Now, probably leadership is probably informed about A, B, C, X, Y, and Z, but it's not that it's like loosey-goosey, like, okay, we just going to do it. We're going to throw it up in your face and say, y'all take this or leave it, et cetera. It's a very lengthy and intensive process. And so that, if I was on the outside looking in, I'd be like, oh man, this is crazy. This is crazy. If I want to make the shift here now, what bothers me here is on one article that I read is when they listed 2 of the candidates. Now they said there's 11 final. So it's 11. I think they narrowed it down to 11 finalists, if I'm not mistaken. I think one of the articles said it's a bunch of articles that I read in preparation to get ready for this broadcast and this interview. If I'm not mistaken, I think they said that it was 11 candidates, right? And when they narrowed it down, she didn't make the final list. And so somehow along the line, it says more than 40 candidates from diverse backgrounds across age, gender, and sexual orientation have been considered for the role during a documenting vetting process by the committee comprised of mostly women. The committee published the criteria and requirements as part of the job posting to which.
Say that again.
That the majority of,
You said the majority of the candidates were women?
No, the majority on the committee.
Oh, the majority on the committee.
On the committee are women. Yeah, the majority on the committee is women. Right. And so somehow it went from over 40 candidates to now I think they narrowed it down to maybe 11, if I'm not mistaken. And then in one article that was also published in the local paper, which I didn't think was right, but when I came across this on Sunday before it hits the local paper and everything, they narrowed it down to, they said 11, but out of the 11, they printed 2 of the candidates' name. So let me give you some insight here why I have a problem with those candidates' name being mentioned. So let me share with you a story, Pastor Johnson. So when I pastored in Durham, North Carolina, right? But after 18 months, I was like, I need to go. You know what I mean? I literally was like, I need to go. And so what I did was there was a church that I was a candidate for when I was in seminary, and I didn't get it. You know what I mean? I didn't get it. Oh, I'm sorry, Ebony. We're broadcasting through Restream, and I forgot you can look at comments. And Ebony, our social media manager, says caller ID. She busted out laugh when I told her that's call ID. So going back, so when I was candidating for this church, that now mind you, I candidated for this church when I was in seminary, but I didn't get it. But then the church became available again. And I'm like, after 18 months, I'm like, yo, man, I'm done. And so I decided that I put my name in the hat to be a candidate again for this church because I wanted to leave. I wanted to go somewhere else. But the church was like 20 minutes from where I'm pastoring, 20, no more than 30 minutes. And so now it's getting close for me to go preach at this church, right? So that they can consider me as their pastor. One of the mothers of the church who I'm close to, name I'm not going to mention, and I love her dearly. She transitioned from labor to reward about a year or so after I moved back to the Philadelphia area. And she and I were tight like glue. She calls me one day and she says, Reverend Weathers, I wasn't called Pastor, Reverend Weathers, I heard you might be leaving us. Says, leaving? What do you mean leaving? Well, such and such a pastor called. It was an older pastor. I'm not going to mention his name or what's the connection here. Basically called her up and said that I might be leaving. I tell that story to say somehow along the line, he was trying to leak out that I was getting ready to interview for the church that was less than 20 miles away from where I was pastoring. So what I did was, because there was also some turmoil going on, we made some changes in the church, and it caused a major explosion. When the change happened, I pulled my name out the hat, because first thing came to my head was, if folks find out that I'm candidating for a church, they're going to boot me out of here, period. So I'd say that to move forward and everything. When I applied to pastor in Philadelphia, I intentionally, when I knew I definitely was going to be leaving, I decided that I was going to candidate for a church not in North Carolina and not in Durham. You got me, not in North Carolina, in the state of North Carolina, especially not in the city of Durham or the surrounding areas, because I didn't want word getting out that I was a candidate somewhere and then they make it hard for me while I'm there or decide they didn't want me anymore. And so all that being said, when people candidate for a church and they're currently pastoring, most of us, we do it outside the area because we don't want nobody to know what we're doing, because we want to keep the stability within our congregation. When I saw only one article, one news source put two of the names in the paper, and I was hot when I saw that. And I was like, how dare they put these names in the newspaper? That's not right. And the reason why I mention it, it's not right, because it's supposed to be a private matter. It's not right. How dare they put, out of all the 11 candidates, you put those two names out there like that? And I will say this, you know, the one thing about both of these candidates is, you know, the one I know personally is a strong preacher, strong leader, strong preacher, you know, definitely a strong preacher for sure. But what both of them have in common, and I'm not saying that, you know, the female candidate doesn't have this in common, but one thing they both have in common is that they definitely have strong political connections. And when you tie that into Abyssinian Baptist Church and everything, you know, could it be that the female candidate, you know, had the theological backing, you know, et cetera? I'm not, and I take that back. Maybe she had strong political ties also, because when you think about it, she was connected to Raphael Warnock. So I don't want to sit up here and give an aspersion and say she didn't have the political connections, but I do know two of the candidates per se had strong political connections as well. So it goes to, what is the direction that the congregation would like to go? You know, do they want to be prophetic? They want to be political, etc. But I just don't think the lawsuit is the way to go. And that's the challenge that I face with this whole entire process. I understand, you know, somebody has to take a stand, because if it's true, you know, if it's true, now I personally don't think it's going to trial. I don't think a judge is going to take it up.
Well, I think that if it doesn't go to trial, sometimes what happens is somebody has to take the sheets off and expose the body.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to draw attention to the inequities that face us in whatever, whether they be the church, whether they be in the workplace, wherever they be. We have a congregation that is 80%, 90% female, but a female can't be the pastor of the church. There's a problem. When you have a search committee, and then I theologically I got to ask the question of what are we teaching in our churches when we exclude people because of gender and race in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
I know in the Methodist Church, it took a while, and we still have to, don't get me wrong, in the Methodist Church, there are some churches who say, don't send us a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Don't send us a woman. And there's some churches that say, don't send us an African American. Don't send us a minority. And we'll say that and say this is where the congregation is. And when are we going to stand up for our sisters and say, listen, you know, this types of stuff just isn't right, and it isn't godly.
Right.
And if it was your wife who was candidating for a church, or if it was my daughter who was candidating for a church, qualified, credentialed,
right,
and didn't get it because of their of them being female, I would be fit to be tied.
Yeah,
because God doesn't call us. God doesn't call us because of our gender. God calls us because of our ableness and our calling. And we're looking on. Go ahead.
No, Johnson. No, because we get caught up into. So here it is, right? You know where I'm going, because you and I, we've had this conversation. So we are products of racism, right? From one culture that will discriminate us against us because of the color of our skin. And then in return, we take the practices of racism and then we practice it on each other. And so if we're not practicing classism on each other, then we practice, let's call it for what it is, skinism on each other. What is skinism? That's just a word I just made up. Skinism is then we start to, how can you say it, discriminate amongst each other, whether you're light skin, dark skin, brown skin, etc. So then we go through the skinism, and then we go through the sexism. You got me? And the sexism is, and even in the church, the sexism is, you know, I'm not going to have a woman over me as pastor. And I'm going to get real with you. Sometimes some of the greatest critics of women, not greatest critics, says that the large amount of voices about women not being pastors, sometimes it's not men.
It's women.
It's
right?
women. It's women themselves.
It's women.
It's women. And that's not taken away from me, because there's some men that just flat out will not have a woman as pastor. I remember the church that I left and everything. This is not reflective of the church that I left, but I always tell the story. I never forget. It was an early stage of the pastorate there. One of the secretaries, who was secretary at the time, not at the time I left, I was off this particular Friday, and I got a call. And the call said, the secretary called and said, "Hey, this particular chair of the deacon board called and wanted to know, could any of our associate ministers come over, be invited to preach, because we're in the process of looking for a pastor." I said, "Sure, tell them no problem. You can invite our associate ministers." And then I hung up, and then I called the right back, and I says, "Okay," I says, "find out from that particular chair of the deacon board, understand that half of my it's not mine, but half of the ministerial staff at the time were female." And I said, "So find out, do they embrace female preachers?" And so she called me back, and Deacon's exact words were, I forget the name of the church, "Oh, we don't have that mess here." And so I said to her, I said, "You call that chair of the deacon board back, and you tell that chair, if he cannot accept women as preachers, that he can't have any of the men."
Dr. Weathers, the reason why some of our communities are messed up is because our churches are messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we're having so many issues sometimes around the fact that we can't lead our communities as the church is because we can't lead our congregations, and our congregations can't be the leaders within their own right.
Mm-hmm.
And for the fact that my sister is suing, this probably would have went by the wayside. We probably would have never heard about this unless if it not had been for a lawsuit.
And that's now I will be honest with you, I have a problem with the lawsuit. I do. And I could be wrong. I have a problem with the lawsuit because there's times that we're to sue, and it's just bad witnessing, man. And I know someone will say, "Well, where do you draw the line and stop this?" I don't know, but this is not what we do, man. This is not what we do. Now, someone said this is hypocritical because when the church that you left, you had a lawsuit. No, let me clear the narrative. I was being sued frivolously, which was crazy, and I filed a counter out of anger for the same amount that they were frivolously suing me over. Let me share that with you. And I never shared with you this, Johnson. I probably could have got it. And let me share with you how. So when the frivolous lawsuit happened, right, they were suing me for $50,000. It was crazy, Johnson. $50,000. Till this day, don't know why $50,000. And now they would have never got it out of my pocket because I would have had to come out of the insurance, right? So I countered, same amount. Counter, same amount. Oh, we got some comments coming. And so after I left, Johnson, the lawsuit was supposed to be withdrawn from the court documents, and it didn't happen. So 6 months later, I got to go back to court because, mind you, they took me to court to try to get me out, which is crazy. And the judge threw it out. Now I got to go back to court because I got a $50,000 lawsuit hanging over my head. I get to the court, $50,000 lawsuit hanging over my head. Their attorney didn't show up. Neither did anybody from the congregation, because I don't believe the whole entire congregation even knew what was going on. They heard the rumors, but didn't know the implication. So I got a $50,000 lawsuit over my head. There's a $50,000 counter, I show up to court and they didn't show up. What do you think could have happened? The lawyer was already in the process of getting the case dismissed, but when they did not show up, that opened the door for me to go for it. But I didn't. You got me? I didn't. I did not. Because that's not how we as God's people handle our business. And I personally would not want to pastor a church that didn't want me. Because one article said that the lawsuit said that not only was they suing for damages and everything, but to be instated as installed as pastor. Reverend Benita Weathers, my wife, says the following: I think the biggest concern is the impact of suing the church on the kingdom. Scripture teaches us otherwise to handle our disagreement within the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1-8. I know I've been doing a lot of talking, Pastor John. Share with me your thoughts, man.
I think again, I think the lawsuit is well. I don't think that any judge in America would install her as pastor over the wishes of the general congregation. I think that what the judge would say is that she needs to be on the list. As you were talking and I was looking at one of the articles, it's sort of like saying to Donald Trump that you left him off the ballot, put him back on and let the people decide. You know, we can't make him president. Put him on the ballot and let the people decide. And let it go as that. She's saying that it was the deck was stacked against her from walking in the door. That they had no idea. They had no inkling of putting her up as a candidate, serious candidate for pastor, because she's a woman. And what other recourse, Dr. Weathers, does she have? What other recourse right now does Dr. Turner has? What does she have other than a lawsuit?
The flip side of that is, so what we have to understand is interviewing for a pastor is not just being hired, it's a calling. And in that calling, if they don't embrace you, you shake the dust off your feet and keep moving. Maybe, and that's a red herring for me, because then it sounds like condescending and everything like that. But what I can say to you is, I can't say this from the New York perspective, but most likely she might be blackballed within Baptist church circles to ever be called, of the fear that if I don't select her as pastor, then I'm gonna get hit with a lawsuit. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying with you the mindset of Black Baptist church culture from my experience. Now, this is just my experience.
Where does the church? So now we have a potential division within the congregation.
You got
because
that
the
right.
lawsuit is out there. The lawsuit is out there, and there's people going to gather up on both sides. And now we have a strong African American church, politically connected, that are now going to be at odds with each other over the fact that they did not do equity among a woman of color for the pastorate. You got young people in that congregation saying, why not? And you got other people in that congregation saying never.
Well, let's backtrack.
Survive and be impactful in that community.
Hey, Johnson, let's backtrack. At this point, we haven't heard from the congregation, because the only one we heard from the lawsuit doesn't from looking at this earlier. The lawsuit hits one person from the church pulpit search committee, and if I'm not mistaken, Abyssinian Baptist Church. But most of the discourse isn't even coming from the congregation. It's coming from the process of the pulpit search committee. And so what we're dealing with is, this is alleged until it's proven. You got me? This is alleged until it's proven.
You and I being pastors, we know that what is alleged opens up a can of worms for people to line up on either side.
Yeah.
Now, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of saying, as a congregation, as a church, this has the potential to impact, split, and cause all sorts of issues. And then you have the naming of pastors that's going to cause ruckus in other congregations.
Now, let's add. Let me add to what you said. Right. No. Let me add. Let me add to what you just. Let me add to what you just said. Not only a ruckus within other congregations, but if one of those names is called,
come on,
you got me, huh?
Yeah.
If one of those names is called, so now you have a ruckus in the congregation that they're pastoring. But then if their name is called, then you got a ruckus and a divide possibly within the congregation because their names was leaked out there. And so this is where I get a little animated about this. That is insensitive, and that should have never happened.
So
it should have never happened.
So do I withdraw my name? Is the right thing to do for me to withdraw my name, or do I make a response to say I will only come with X% of the vote?
So
if you can't give me 80% of the vote, I don't want it.
So let me backtrack and share with you what my father-in-law said to me. And my wife chimes in, even if the courts allow her to take the pulpit, she has likely already lost the congregation. It will be very difficult for her to lead effectively. So you go back and say, should they withdraw the name?
She's exactly right.
Yeah. So you asked, should they withdraw the name? Let me go back, and I'm not being subjective. Let me go back to my experience, and I'm laughing for a reason. Because my father-in-law had always had humdingers and always had stuff to make you think. So now I'm getting these calls, right, about the craziness that was going on at the church that I was candidating for. I ended up pastoring that church and everything, but I'm hearing all of the negative stuff that's going on. And I made a decision. And I said, I'm done. I'm taking my name out the hat. Those folks is crazy. I am not going. I said it, man. I said, when folks is crazy, and they're not. I'm not demeaning them. I'm sharing with you my thought process to build up to how my father-in-law checked me. I said, when folks is crazy, they fighting, and you don't understand what I was going through mentally because I felt my name was at the center of the controversy. So I'm feeling like if my name isn't at the center, they wouldn't be at each other's throat. So now I'm feeling guilt, right? I'm feeling guilt because I'm like, how could my name, me getting support to be pastor of this congregation, they're all fighting because there's one group that doesn't want me, there's one group that does, and they fighting because the group that wants me is fighting to get in. And then when I got in, some of them turned on me. That's a whole nother story. But I get in, right? That's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story and a whole nother conversation. And so you got one group that's fighting for me to get in and another group that's fighting for me not to get in. And so I'm feeling the tension because I'm like, yo, they crazy. I'm out of here. I have low, I have little tolerance for nonsense. So I needed somebody to sign off on what I was getting ready to do. So I called my father-in-law, let's say law, but my father-in-law. And I gave him the whole narrative. Dad, these folks is crazy. They fighting, over my calling. They at each other's throat. Some of them literally had a fisticuff. That's what's coming back to me. I don't know if it's true enough. They tell me literally had a fisticuff over my calling. My father-in-law listened very tentatively. And then he said the following. He says, Wayne, on the phone, I'm in North Carolina. His exact words was, Wayne, the church is full of sinners. And if the church was not full of sinners, there would be no need for you and I. Man, I was mad when he said that. Man, I was PO'd Because I wanted Pop Johnson to say, "You're right, Wayne. Take your name out the hat. There are other churches, not only in North Carolina, but throughout the country. Don't limit yourself there. Go ahead and put your resume in and let your gifts be used somewhere else." That's what I wanted him to say.
Right.
But he hit me with a right hook. Boom. And I tell that story to say, you asked, should they take their name out the hat? No.
Well, let me say this.
Uh-huh.
Let me say this. I think as I think about the lawsuit and I think about what she's going through, I think that's all she's really saying is level the playing field. All she's saying is give me a fair shot without any preconceived notions about my gender. Don't judge me on my gender. Judge me on my calling, my gifts and graces and skills. Don't look at me as a female pastor. Look at me just as one who is candidating on the same playing field that you would any other person.
So my counter to that would be, there's a need to level the playing field, but there's not a need to scorch the earth to level the playing field. And what we see now is a lawsuit will not level the playing field. It's scorching the earth that will break off into pockets of divide.
Well, maybe it won't level the playing field for her, but maybe it may give pause for the next one. You understand what I'm saying?
But then that comes in. Yeah. So then that comes into calling spiritual discernment to call compared to a secular process to hire. And that's when it comes to Baptist denomination, that is always a balancing act. How do I discern who God is calling compared to who should we hire? Because now it's like everybody gonna be on pins and needles. If a woman comes in and you don't hire her, am I going to get sued for gender discrimination? Which may not be the case. It may or it may not. It may be the case or it may not be the case. And I'm not here to take sides with Abyssinian, and I'm not here to take sides with, Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman. I don't know her personally, but what I've witnessed, her preaching at Ebenezer in Atlanta, Georgia, matriculation to Duke University Divinity School. I've been tracking her movement and everything because she's very, from a theological perspective, very impressive. And I was hoping that she would get Abyssinian Baptist Church. When I heard that she was a candidate for Abyssinian, I was really hoping that she got it. I really was hoping that she would get called, but it didn't happen. I'm not going to say I was, I didn't base it on gender or anything like that. I just was like, she didn't get it. But my attitude was, when she didn't get it, I was like, somebody would pick her up. Somebody will call her. If it's not Abyssinian, it will be somewhere else. I'll close out by saying this is one-on-one. We had a great discussion. Sometimes God protects us from the doors that shut.
Yes.
Some of my greatest blessings have occurred from shut doors, and it hurt. Don't get me wrong, dude. I'm not gonna sit here and say I jumped up and down, shout hallelujah because doors were shut. There's some doors that's been shut, man, that hurt. But after the door shut, I realized sometimes my greatest blessings is from shut doors. Like case in point, I was up for a political position, right? I was up for a political position. I'm not gonna say which one. I was up for a political position, and I didn't get it. And then I got the rumor mill. The rumor mill I got was that you were qualified, but you were denied the position because of your age and because you were a pastor.
Well, yeah.
Because I was over 50 and because you're a pastor. And they started the process all over and put it like this: whatever they was intending to accomplish, they didn't get accomplished. I could have sued, But my attitude was it wasn't my door to walk through. As painful as it was, I really wanted the position to make a difference. I was like, that's not my door to walk through. Another situation when I'll close out, but I have a whole bunch of stories. Another lawsuit that could have been filed. It wasn't against the church or anything. But when we started Vision of Hope Baptist Church, right? And there was this spot in North Philadelphia in this, commercial district and everything next to a Dollar General. They were fixing up the spot next to this Dollar General, the shopping development. It was undeveloped. The outside structure was fine. The inside, they were still developing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I called the landlord, inquiring about it. We were ready to pay the lease fee, signed if they were offering to us 36 months. We didn't have to get a mortgage or anything. 36-month lease fee. Boom, boom, boom. I get a message back from the person, and the person said to me, and I quote, "We do not want to lease to a church because the church take up too much parking. So you're not going to offer a lease to me because we're a church." I had the message. That's a lawsuit. It's a commercial district. You didn't put a restriction there. But what I called him up and said at that particular point, I said, first of all, I said the church wouldn't take up too much parking space because the main time we would be there is on Sunday. I said, second of all, I looked at your parking facility and you hardly don't have any customers parking in your parking lot as it is, even on Sunday. I says, however, we won't beg anybody to take our money. And I hung up. Could have sued, but I didn't. My attitude was, it just wasn't my door to walk through. My wife chimes in, yes, there are definitely blessings and shut doors. So I'm closing out, man. This is a red herring, man, because on one aspect, if what she said is true, then it has to be confronted and dealt with. But it's how do you deal with it? And I'm not saying you have a kumbaya, let's hold hands and let's hug each other and sing the Barney song, I love you and you love me, and we're one big happy family with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you. Won't you say you love me too? No, I'm not a Barney fan, but my kids, when they adults, they used to watch it tremendously. So of course it gets ingrained in your head. But
right.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a moment where Abyssinians membership will have to take a long look at its own processes.
Yeah.
And the people that they put in. And I think that if this does anything good, it begins to have the general membership to look at each other and say, hey, listen, was this godly and was this fair? Is this who we want to be? Do we want our name attached to this?
Yeah.
And that's a membership issue. Forget leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's a membership issue. I'm talking about the folk who put the dollars in the plate and the people who do the ministry. They're going to look at this and say, hey, listen, this was not godly. This was not fair if it's all true. And we need to look at ourselves because now our name is sullied. And our reach has been a little bit diminished. And that's not who God calls us to be at the church.
Just closing out a couple things, man. It's bad witnessing. When you got the AP News, CNN, BET, New York Times, New York Post, it's in the local New York news because I saw it. I looked at the video clip. There actually was a local news story in New York about it. Bad witnessing. You got me?
Yeah.
Bad witnessing. Even with my ordeal, the previous church where I left, the catastrophe that happened in my calling, what my adversaries at the time didn't know was I was planning to leave peacefully. When everything went down, so-called vote that wasn't legitimate, a lot of folks that they organized wasn't legitimate because they didn't follow the process. And that's what the judge hit on also. I saw the handwriting on the wall. And I was going to bow out gracefully because I didn't want the church torn apart. Two things happened. Pastor Robert Shipman, he advised me, listen, man, that's your reputation. You don't want to go out like that. That's your reputation. You have to protect your reputation. And then I get, because one of the persons that texted me and said, you got voted out. I'll give you a call. So I was waiting for the call because I'm like, okay, I don't agree with it, but I can see this is getting ready to tear the church apart.
Right,
so
right.
I'm gonna bow out gracefully. But then I get a nasty note under the door. A nasty note about you need to be gone and et cetera, and then something and blessings to you and your. It was very sarcastic. Blessings to you in your ministry, in your future ministry, like to say we're destroying you and there won't be a future ministry. And I still got it upstairs. I got the whole package of crap from that incident, and I'm not here to demonize. I'm here to share the narrative. And that's when I was like, no, I can't go out like this. I wasn't trying to like hold on to a position. Two reasons why I stayed. I stayed because one, I didn't hear God's calling to say go. I wanted to go. I didn't want to be in that mess. I wanted to go. I didn't hear God's calling to say go. But then two, I also was like, no, I can't go out like this because now the narrative is going to be created that I was terminated, which affects me in other churches that I will go. You got me? And so I hear the cat. So, but it does. I tell that story to say I was planning on leaving gracefully so that it wouldn't tear the church apart. But because of the action of others, it ended up tearing it apart. Well, not tearing it apart, but it created a rift. I'm not gonna say apart, but it created a rift. My wife says, "Oh, not the whole Barney song." Yeah, babe, the whole Barney song. Our kids are like 20. One is in her late 20s, one is in mid 20s, one is in the early 20s. But I still remember that Barney song because we would have to watch it every morning in North Carolina because we didn't have cable at the time. We couldn't afford cable with daycare and student loans and stuff.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
it's bad. That's
right.
a subject we could talk about. It's bad when the daycare costs more than a mortgage. I'm not joking, dude.
How many did you have in daycare at the same time?
Man, 2.
That's what I had. That's what I had. I had 2.
Dude, the mortgage at that time of our first house was like maybe $900, $950 a month. But the daycare was like $1,000, close to $1,100. Because here's the deal. One child, Jasmine, who's now in her late 20s, she transitioned out of daycare, went to kindergarten. But James and Kayla was an infant. James was 3. I think James was 3 at the time. Yeah, James was 3. So now what people don't know when it comes to daycare, I know we shift subjects and everything. Infants are the most costliest in daycare. And so
that's right.
When you take the infant and you take James, that was like $1,100. And then we switched daycare and we barely made it over that. It was still close to $1,000. And that's not even to mention an additional $135 each month for Jasmine to be in after school care because of the job that I was working.
That's right.
So
that's right.
No, man, the daycare and the after school cost more than the mortgage. Not now because the type of house we have, but yeah. So no, when I talk about no, there was no cable TV, dude, couldn't afford it. Barely could afford yeah. Oh, they said my background is backwards. I don't know what's up with that. That's Restream. I'll figure it out. You have to show me how to do it.
I'll tell you how to do that. I'll show you how to do that.
All right. Well, let's get ready to close this out.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, man.
And I'll have you on my podcast soon. But let's keep up on this. Let's see how this pans out.
Well, we're gonna pick back up. If you got time, we're gonna pick back up next Friday. I got another subject I want to deal with.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And for those who are watching, we're also going to be back on Thursday, WWDB, 8:60 a.m. in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. But we also plan on dominating the podcast space as well. So we're going to sign off. All right. This is Reverend Dr. Wayne M. Weathers and Pastor Robert Johnson of Messiah United Methodist Church. Thank you for checking out Conversation Unplugged, the after conversation on Friday during your lunch break. And now take care. God bless and enjoy your weekend. All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.